Hello, we are HDMI Incorporate. Our group members are Daniel, Irene, Dilip, Hugo, Diego, and Marco. Next slide. So for our project, we're going to be doing a multi-story commercial retail center located at the intersection of Vance Jackson Boulevard and UTSA Boulevard. It's going to be 2 buildings with a footbridge in between, and along with spacing and everything that's needed for the building to be for commercial use. Next slide, please. So here's a general layout of the footprint of how the buildings are going to look. You can see the 2 buildings there, along with a footbridge of 60 feet in span. Next. Here's a general layout of how the buildings are going to look. You can see that there's going to be 2 different sizes of units that can be used. Some that are smaller, and then some that are twice in size for larger commercial uses. Next slide.
This is our structural plan view. We are following the architectural floor plan. Our calculations are based on the 15th edition of the Steel Construction Manual. We assume A992 for W shapes and A500 for HSS shapes. And we did welded connections throughout the building. And we went for the worst case scenario for our calculations. So most of them ended up being the interior beam, girder, and columns. Next slide. Here we have an example of what the roof, beam, and girder and columns shapes would be. Next slide. And here's another example of what it would look for the first floor. Next slide.
So here's a general layout of how the bridge members would span out. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that between our beams and our girders for the members, we were able to decide that our beams are going to be W8 by 28 joists, and they're going to be connected using clip angles with A325 bolts to a W14 by 68 for our girders. Next slide, please. Now, our so our girders are going to be connected onto the HSS 10 by 10 by 1/4 columns. They're going to have a mixed connection that's going to consist of bolt-on bolts and welds. Next slide.
All right, so for the geotechnical engineering, we're going to be developing on some undeveloped land. It's mostly, the soils consist mostly of fatty clays towards the top and some lean clays towards the middle layers. The biggest challenge on the land is going to be a medium to high potential vertical rise of 2.5 to 3 inches, and that will be adjusted with our cut and fill to reduce the PBR. Next slide. Okay. So we will be designing a slab on grade foundation for these buildings. The building pads will be 117 by 117 feet. And we're designing them following the WRI method. So the slab depth is going to be 5 inches. We're going to have 8 beams in both directions. And then the reinforcing is as shown on the screen. Next slide. Here we have the grading layout to get the water out of the parking lot and away from the building. These will mostly flow into existing channels along UTSA Boulevard and Vance Jackson Road. Next slide. And then the pavement, we'll be using a flexible asphalt pavement system. And again, a key aspect to having this work right is just proper site preparation. Next slide.
This is our parking lot design layout. Based on the Unified Development Code and ADA guidelines, it was determined that we need 210 parking spaces, with 7 of them being general ADA spaces and 2 of them being van accessible. We decided on a 2-way operating aisle width of 25 feet and sidewalk width of 6 feet. And based on the City of San Antonio standards, it was determined that we will have a driveway width of 30 feet. Slide, please. After conducting a traffic impact analysis of the area near our development, it was determined that no further traffic control improvements to mitigate traffic impacts will be necessary based on existing conditions, traffic count data provided by the City of San Antonio, and visual observations of traffic during peak hours, which showed free-flowing traffic with low volumes and little delays. Slide, please.
So as our Director of Environmental Engineering, I conducted a phase 1 environmental site assessment to see if there are any historical or current concerns that would negatively impact the conditions on our site. Upon visit, I found the site contained many bushes and trees that we have to remove. We expect to preserve a majority of the trees as they're located away from our retail center. The area where our building will be is mainly taken up by small bushes. I found no contamination concerns on the property itself or adjacent properties. Environmental radius reports showed that the nearest hazardous waste generating facilities and contaminated spill sites are 1/2 mile to 6 miles away, so they should not impact our site. No current or historical uses of the properties nearby suggest any official recognized environmental concerns, whether they're historic, recent, or controlled. Our site is also not located in Edwards Aquifer Carstone or a golden cheeked warbler habitat, which is a type of endangered bird. So we don't have to worry about any endangered species either. And further investigation, such as a phase 2 ESA, won't be necessary at this time.
For the water system, we were able to determine there's an existing water system on site. The existing water system consists of a 12-inch PVC pipeline. Looking at our project, we calculated that the required water supply, it's 7 EDUs, while using the water service area provided by SOS, it was determined that a 1.5-inch water meter with the 1.5-inch service line will be necessary to provide enough water to the retail center. Also, a 6-inch fire hydrant will be added to the existing water line. Next slide. While looking at our sewer system, there is an existing sewer line consisting of a 8-inch PVC line with a downgrade slope of 0.4%. We calculated 10 EDUs for our sewage, and based on our calculations, we decided that there will be 2 minor laterals at 6 inches connecting to a main lateral at 8 inches. That main lateral will connect to the existing manhole that is located at the bottom right of our site. Next slide.
So we thank you so much for listening to our presentations, and we look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.